Following on from the previous story, Evil of the Daleks, the Doctor, Jamie and Victoria leave Skaro to land on Telos and team up with a team of archaeologists to explore the lost city of the Cybermen and their last resting place, little realising they are walking into a trap. Tomb of the Cybermen is arguably one of Patrick Troughton's finest performances, in that he shows off the many-layered characteristics that make up the Second Doctor, from being calculating in a way to manipulate others into showing their true intentions by playing down his own intelligence, to being the caring, humble person he is with his companions. In regards to being a manipulator, this plays out as a major factor in the first half of the story, which revolves more around the archaeologist exploring the city of the Cybermen, in particular with the character of Kliegg and his eagerness to crack the logic code to open the tomb. With the Doctor's suspicion risen, he seemingly teams up with Kliegg in pointing him in the right direction with suggestions towards cracking the code, but allowing Kliegg to think his own genius solved the logic puzzle to open the tomb, leading to his attempts to revive the Cybermen for what forms the second half of the story. Due to the events of Victoria's debut story still apparent, the Doctor acts somewhat as a guardian angel towards her, none more so than a warming scene in which the Doctor explains that she will eventually move on from her father's death from her first story, but not forget him. He uses an example of his own family, in that he chooses when to remember them for the good times by merely closing his eyes and seeing them, but allowing their memory to rest in the back of his mind while he carries on being the Doctor. This is a rare moment in the show where the Doctor talks about his family, whilst leaving going into any detail, and is the first reference into his own granddaughter Susan, who was a companion during the show's first 2 seasons. The Second Doctor is in a way unique, but also at the same time a sort of blueprint of all subsequent Doctors that followed. When Patrick Troughton took over, it would have been easy for himself and the production team to merely replicate the Hartnell persona. We know now that the Doctor's characteristics change with every regeneration, but with the Second Doctor, the gamble's taken to take the Doctor's persona in the complete opposite direction from the First Doctor, to a more relaxed hobo-like appearance, being more comical, witty, and more physical. That's not to serve as a downplay to William Hartnell as the Doctor, but more of a credit to Patrick Troughton to take the bold new direction. Having said that, the Second Doctor does carry a trait that hasn't really been as apparent in any other Doctor since, and that's downplaying his own level of intellect and intelligence. Instead, he disguises his genius, in particular in front of his adversaries, and instead puts on this clown-like foolish persona that throws people off guard and allow them to think that they have the upper hand, while the Doctor himself manipulates events. Jamie, by now, is fully developed as a companion. Despite him being from the 18th century, he has an ability of capturing basic understanding of things around him that came after his time, from fashion to technology. As ever, he is utterly faithful and trustworthy to the Doctor, even if he at times is unsure about his decision-making. He is also daring and fearless, but not necessarily stupid. In Tomb of the Cybermen, he is willing to put himself on the line when a target machine is operated despite not knowing its true functions or potential deadly effects, as well as showing no fear in protecting the Doctor in going with him and the archaeologists into the tomb, despite being more than aware of the potential threat of the Cybermen, having already come across them in the story, The Moon Base. Although not scared of facing the Cybermen, he isn't stupid so much as to try to go toe-to-toe with them once they awake, and attempts to tactically hide from them and escape from the tomb to alert the others outside, albeit not successful. This was Victoria's second adventure, but first actually travelling with the Doctor and Jamie. As a character, she is still raw from the death of her father, and due to her being a young teenager, she is still vulnerable, which explains why the Doctor behaves like a guardian-like figure to her. Like Jamie, she isn't from the modern-day era, with her being from the 19th century, and she typifies the fragile shyness of a young lady from that era and upbringing. Although prone to screaming and being easily frightened, at times she has this ability to draw up inner courage and tackle adversary, in particular when holding Kaftan at gunpoint despite not probably having any idea how a gun works. She has an instinct to know when being lied to, when being untrustworthy of Kaftan while they are outside the tomb, as well as being inquisitive when inspecting the Cyberman's reactivation chamber and getting trapped inside it, as well as noticing a deactivated Cybermat, which she then puts in her bag. Compared to Jamie and the Doctor, she doesn't really face as much threat from the Cybermen in the story, since she doesn't venture into the tomb, but she does face threat from the treacherous Kaftan, who she shares a lot of screen time with, and the Cybermats, once activated. That's by no means to say that she has a side role in the story, but given different threats to just Cybermen, which allows her character to develop as opposed to screaming, which she would do more often in later stories, but by then having her character fully developed, which was achieved through Tomb of the Cybermen in particular. Eric Kliegg is a member of the Brotherhood of Logicians, who sponsor the expedition to find the tomb. However, his true intentions is to awaken the dormant Cybermen from their tomb and use them so that the Brotherhood can rule Earth. To everyone but the Doctor, he initially comes across as ambitious and intelligent, but us as the audience are given an insight into his private discussions with his partner Kaftan and their henchman Cyberman. The Doctor elects to team up with Kliegg to confirm his suspicions, which come true once the tomb is accessed, and shows his willingness to kill anyone who attempts to resist his attempts to revive the Cybermen. An intelligent individual who uses logic to make decisions, from cracking codes to deciding how to treat other people and the Cybermen. It is perhaps his assumption that he can bargain with the Cybermen that proved to be his downfall, as he soon finds himself prisoner like everyone else in the story, and ultimately killed by the Cybermen. Kliegg, as an additional human antagonist, was the start of a theme in Cybermen stories, in which they would use a human to help obtain their goal before finding them obsolete. In this case, the Cybermen waiting for someone intelligent enough to wake them so they could be used as a leader of a new generation of Cybermen. This would carry on over the years, with Tobias Vaughan in The Invasion, Kelman in Revenge of the Cybermen, Ringway in Earthshock, and even John Lumick in Rise of the Cybermen and The Age of Steel. The human foil is effective in Cybermen stories, as they act as symbols of deceit. As formidable as the Cybermen are, they lack any traits or factors that allow someone to be deceitful. Their control and dominance is brought by their overwhelming power, but the use of the human ally allows their human adversaries to let their guard down. Kliegg was played here by Cypriot actor George Pastell, making his early appearance in Doctor Who, having also appeared in the James Bond film From Russia With Love and the 1959 Hammer version of The Mummy. Due to his exotic Mediterranean appearance, he often found work in the 60s in either spy films or playing a villain in TV serials. He passed away in 1976 at the age of 53. Tomb of the Cybermen saw the first of two appearances of the Cyber Controller. Here he is presented as the overall leader of the Cybermen, or at least those based on Telos, and is noticeably taller than the other Cybermen, thanks to his semi-transparent dome on his head that houses a brain. In this story, he coordinates the capture of the tomb infiltrators and orders the activation and release of the Cybermen, rodent-sized cyberdized creatures who lead the attack outside of the tomb. Although the Controller and the other Cybermen look formidable in this story, they are actually very limited due to being low on energy, and as such it is only the Cyber Controller who manages to get fully re-energized and actually leave the tomb, therefore posing the biggest threat towards the Doctor, his companions, and the archaeologists. The Cyber Controller was played here by Michael Kilgareth, who stood at 6'5" or just under 2 meters, which was used as such to give that air of dominance of the Cyber Controller, over the other slightly shorter Cybermen. The costume itself probably stood at more near 7 foot or 2.1 metres due to the domed head, which was added to the air of dominance. Kilgareth would once again play the controller in 1985's Attack of the Cybermen, as well as appearing as an Ogron in Frontier in Space, and a K-1 robot in Robot. Peter Hawkins provided the electronic voice of all the Cybermen in this story, as he did with the majority of the stories in the 60s, as well as the Daleks during the same era, adding menace to the Cybermen's featureless faces, with the exception of an opening mouthpiece. Like the added extra of a human in league with the Cybermen, providing an extra dimension to the Doctor's antagonists, the same can be said regarding the Cyber Controller. Here you are presented with a leader who is physically different from the rest of the Cybermen and presents a form of logical hierarchy, much like an army, making them appear more organised and tactical rather than just being a group attacking their intended target. Later stories would also show Cybermen in a similar role to the Controller, including the Cyber Planner in the Wheel of Space, Cyber Director in The Invasion, and Cyber Leaders in all the stories from Revenge of the Cybermen onwards. Tomb of the Cybermen was written by Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis, who co-created the concept of the Cybermen and wrote their first 3 stories starting with the 10th planet, and with this story being their final collaboration together. Kit Pedler was a qualified medical scientist, as well as a writer, and was originally brought in by previous producer Innes Lloyd to provide the show with some hard science, and Jerry Davis had previously acted as script editor. Here they borrow heavily from ancient Egyptian culture and horror elements such as the film The Mummy, regarding the whole concept of the Cybermen being entombed and being uncovered by archaeologists, or to revive and release a monster, rather than observing their dead bodies with the added twist of a mad scientist, or archaeologist in this case, in the form of Kliegg, who is hell-bent on using them to his own devices. Despite the horror elements, they still maintain their real science concepts, with the use of logic to break the computer code to open the tombs, and although not named, the use of cryogenics to preserve the Cybermen in a tomb, rather than mummification. There could be an argument in the fact that the supporting human characters in the story were written in a stereotypical manner from a British bias. The archaeologists with no hidden agenda in Professor Parry, Viner and Hayden all have English accents and seem to want to do things properly and accordingly while exploring the tomb. You then have Kliegg, Kaftan and Toberman all with foreign accents and a hidden agenda, and even before the realisation their plan comes about, they give off the impression that they aren't to be trusted. You then have Captain Hopper and Callum, 2 of the crew of the rocket who spent the majority of the story making repairs, with American accents, who come across as brash but always seem to be ready to come in and save the day. This, at the end of the day, is just emulating the style and treatment of foreign characters in British TV of that era, as a representation of the political climate in the real world, with the big American allies in the West and the seemingly untrustworthy Europeans and Russians to the east. Although I agree this style of writing wouldn't fit in as much into TV of today, it is of its time, and I'm not going to be the one to judge whether it's deemed as racist or xenophobic, but leave that for you to decide. What I will add though is that whatever your view on the portrayal of Toberman being the big silent servant of black origin, he is the one who saves the day and takes on the Cyber Controller and sacrifices himself in the process. This was director Maurice Barry's second story on Doctor Who, having directed the previous season's Cyberman story, The Moonbase, which I'm assuming was the reasoning behind him getting Tomb of the Cybermen, given his familiarity in knowing how to work with and shoot the Cybermen. There is nothing in particular standout in his style of directing other than that he makes full use of the sets and gives the illusion of them being bigger than what they actually are. But I'll talk more about that later. He would go on to direct one more story with 1968's The Dominators. However, he does hold the distinction of being one of few people to have had a job behind and in front of the camera, having shifted to acting in the 1970s and appearing as Toland in the Fourth Doctor story, Creature from the Pit, in 1979. This was designer Martin Johnson's only credit on Doctor Who, and I think he did a fantastic job with the sets. In keeping with the theme of ancient Egypt, the lost city of the Cybermen and the tomb itself are heavily influenced by the pyramid tombs, given that you have Cybermen designs on the wall inspired by hieroglyphics, as well as the layout of the control room, revitalization chamber, target room and the tomb itself inspired by the tomb of Tutankhamun, the exception of the tomb being underground. The entrance of the tomb gives the impression of it leading to hundreds of feet down below, despite it only going a few feet. As for the tomb itself, the use of miniature sets is cleverly used here to give the impression of a storied tomb containing a dozen or so Cybermen. Coupled with the use of the slow motion when the Cybermen are awoken, this is truly an exceptional sight, coupled with the music, which brings me on nicely to the music. As the norm with most 60s stories in Doctor Who, stop music was used. In Tomb of the Cybermen, it is used to give an epic cinematic effect with the story. This was the third and final time the Cyberman theme tune was used, having made its debut in the 10th planet. It provides a mix of drums with a delay effect, early keyboard effects, and brass instrumentation to make it an eerie piece of music. Used when the Cybermen awaken at the end of episode 2, it is very effective and is one of the defining moments of 1960s Doctor Who. If you haven't already heard the soundtrack to Tomb of the Cybermen, then click on the link above, and if you want to listen to the piece of music used when they awaken, it starts around the 13 minutes and 50-second mark. Tomb of the Cybermen was first broadcast as the debut story of Patrick Troughton's second season, Season 5, and following on exactly where Season 4's closing story, Evil of the Daleks, ended. It was shown in 4 episodes between the 2nd to the 23rd of September 1967 and was actually the only non-6-part story of Season 5. Its fondness and importance is potentially heightened by the fact that the story, like many of this era, was lost entirely for 25 years, until a copy was discovered in Hong Kong in 1992, and as a result Rush released onto VHS in the same year, supposedly outstripping sales of the film Alien 3. Also, Matt Smith has also labelled it his favourite story. However, whether its great reputation is increased by its lost then found status, what shouldn't be taken away from Tomb of the Cybermen is it being a watershed moment not just for the representation of Cybermen, but the shape of the Patrick Troughton era. The show had moved on from its reliance on Daleks and the historical stories of the Hartnell era, and was now purely immersed in science fiction, with the Cybermen being the new villain of the latter half of the 60s, making 5 appearances in 3 years and becoming one of the most iconic monsters of the show. As for the Cybermen, this story developed them further and gave them more substance to their backdrop, having emerged from being from Mondas to adopting Telos as their new home. They now have a hierarchy structure in having a defined leader in the controller, which was further developed in subsequent stories. Also, the plot of sitting out in hibernation and laying a trap for humans becoming victims of their own intelligence in opening the tomb only to be prisoners and potential conversions into a new faction of Cybermen makes them more cunning in their plotting with the ongoing war with humanity. As mentioned before, this marked the beginning of the human foil enemy used in Cyberman stories, which in turn limits the screen time of the Cybermen, allowing them to appear more sparingly but to heighten shock effect. A lesson perhaps learnt from the overuse of the Daleks in the previous years. Overall, this is a great and iconic story that is thankfully kept to 4 episodes to limit padding. Kliegg is equally as effective as a villain as the Cybermen themselves, and this helps the timing of pace of the story, as well as making the screen time of the Cybermen more important and intense, especially with the emergence of the Cyber Controller. So, that concludes my review on Tomb of the Cybermen. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments below if you think differently to my review. Be sure to tune in for my next video, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.